Hey there, tech enthusiast. This is Life in Cyber. Welcome to the show. I'm Josh. As always, I'm joined by John, Kenny, and Shannon. Dance to the music
He just woke up from his nap. Okay, leave him alone.
He did wake up from his nap.
This is true. I had to have my old man nap. Leave me alone.
Outside of napping, how's everybody else doing today?
I am so stressed out that I actually went to the gym,
What?
which I know. It's the first time in at least a year. Proud of myself.
Yeah, tomorrow you're going to hate yourself. It's okay.
It's totally fine. I was going with the joint routine, which is just do the bare minimum and the lowest level of weights possible, just to get the joints used to moving. And that's how I realized that's what I learned. I'm old as shit, man. Everything popped. It was weird.
I don't think they work out.
No.
I'm sorry.
I feel guilty if I don't do my push-ups for the day. I try to get to 50 a day.
I haven't done a push-up in 10 years.
I'm like, you can do push-ups? I'm just kidding.
I can do push-ups, and what I've learned to do this year is pull-ups. I've always had terrible shoulders, but I'm up to 15 pull-ups, and I'm very proud of that.
I can do 3. I'm too fat.
I've never been this intimidated of you. This is weird.
I know. I feel like I'm going to get beat up for my lunch money.
I'm too far away. All right, so we got some tech news today. As always, our spotlight today will be cyber attack liability, and we'll kind of lead into that from our tech news. And then our balancing act is stress relief. As Kenny mentioned, sometimes the gym helps, and we'll talk about other things that help us out from an individual level. So first, WinRAR's vulnerability. How many of you guys still use it?
What's WinRAR?
Isn't it still free?
What year is it?
It is.
It's an unlimited trial, John. Not free, unlimited trial.
Oh, okay. So I can just install it on my business corporation, probably, right? Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, you're an admin probably, so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's against the TOS guys.
Who reads
When
that?
were zip files built into operating systems? Was that back in Windows XP, Windows 7?
That is zip files, Kenny. They have custom files called RARs, and you need the software.
What's the difference? Help me understand.
The encryption, or not the encryption, let me wake up. Compression algorithm, thank you.
Adult napping, guys. Just be careful.
I need more of this green substance that I cannot name.
We're not sponsored by
I'm pretty
Mountain
sure we're
Slew.
not. Yes, I'm pretty sure they don't sponsor us. It's okay.
Are you trying to get a Gamer Fuel sponsor or something?
Oh, yeah.
We could do that if you really want it.
Let's do it.
Anyway,
Oh,
WinRAR.
So what's this vulnerability about? And what's the impact? How many people are still using WinRAR? Is there data on that anywhere?
Well, about 500 million people are still using WinRAR, and what the vulnerability is they do not have checking inside of their software, so it allows a second process to run, which, could be anything. Could be a malicious payload, could be Hello Kitty. You don't know. The opportunities are endless. Or upgrade to the latest version, which is patched.
Has there been any reports of it being exploited yet, or is it just a CVE alert?
It's a CVE alert, but it has been exploited. Threat actors have to create a special payload to send people, but that's not hard to do with phishing campaigns and whatnot anymore. Script Kitty with Metasploit can be like, I'm going to send an email.
Yeah, it looks like it's a 7.8 rating. That's pretty high.
Also, to counter Shannon's note about RAR files being different than zip files, apparently Microsoft announced back in May that it's adding support for RAR files into the Windows operating system. So
Damn it,
WinRAR will no longer be necessary.
You stole what I was going to talk about off of that.
It only took, 20 years?
Probably longer than that, because zip was 98 according to the article.
When are we going to see Microsoft start supporting tarballs?
We're getting closer to that. I can type ifconfig now and CD and LS. I'm getting closer.
Don't they have the Windows subsystem for Linux or Linux subsystem for Windows? Did I say that backwards?
They do.
Mm-hmm. It's native now, too. You don't even have to install it.
Oh, wow. So it's just built into the PowerShell console?
Correct.
That's nice. So the answer is short-term, update WinRAR. Long-term, plan on phasing it out? We're not sponsored by WinRAR, are we?
I don't know if WinRAR even makes money anymore. I mean, how are they still a thing?
I
But
don't know.
yeah, it's so funny that you talked about Tarball, and of course, my instant brain goes to Google and says, "Oh yeah, they are adding it." Okay, native support.
I just want to say too, and this is a bit of a tangent, but it's going to be short. I really appreciate Microsoft under Satya Nadella. The whole strategy that he's taken since becoming CEO has been, let's play nice. Let's find partnerships. Let's collaborate. Let's bring everything forward. And it has shot Microsoft up so positively and has made our lives as admins infinitely better. Fantastic leadership.
Definitely a positive change. No more old guard.
I like it a lot better than the old Steve Ballmer Microsoft. That was oof.
Well, I think they finally learned, if you play nice with everybody, we'll all be profitable, right? We all can make each other's lives easier. And I don't know. I have nothing against running Windows or Linux anymore. And I used to be a 100% Linux guy, as you guys know.
I will miss the nerd dancing whenever they release the new Windows, though. Those are great.
I like to bring up the 98, Bill Gates dance every now and then. That's a fun one.
That's a great one. All right, let's move on. Cloud Nordic, a Danish company, gets ransomware. They knock out the entire infrastructure and they tell them not paying. I think it's ballsy. I give them a lot of credit for it, and I don't blame them. I think more of us need to say no to ransomware so we can drop the value of their attacks. Right now, it's too much of a cash cow.
I think it really comes down to like a risk situation, right? Like when you have a ransomware attack and you've got a dollar amount of, hey, here's, how much you have to pay to get your stuff back. Like every company is going to look at that as a cost benefit analysis, right? I think Cloud Nordic was one of those where either the cost benefit analysis, wasn't in their favor, either that or they're small enough where they can be kind of activists about it. But I think most companies can't afford to not pay. Like, I agree with you. Like, we do need to kind of bring the demand down and try to make it less lucrative so that it's not so frequent. But at the same point, no company is going to look at a massive ransomware attack and say, like, it's not cheaper for us to pay the ransom. Like, most of the time, it is cheaper to pay the ransom. Like, I compare this to shipping costs going through, I can't remember it. I think it's the Red Sea near Somalia, where there are literally like Somalian pirates that literally like hijack full-on freight ships out there constantly. Like it's very frequent, and what businesses do is literally just like have ransoms as part of the shipping cost because it's cheaper to go through that than it is to go through, go around the continent of Africa to get through that water area. So I think of it as the same way. Like a lot of businesses are just going to treat it as a cost of doing business.
That's a great documentary, by the way, if anyone has some time to watch it.
Where's that on? Is that on a platform?
That's the Red Devil. I'm pretty sure it's on Curiosity Stream as well, but
I just tried to go to Cloud Nordic and it's just an HTML page that says not found.
Yep.
It's the way it is. I've been through that. A few of us have been through ransomware in the past, right? So
one of the things that I was reading about with them too was that they still haven't alerted all of their customers yet. The most recent article said, those of you that we have talked to, you lost your data. And those of you that we have not talked to yet, you've also lost your data. That's rough. If you're Cloud Nordic, how do you continue doing business? Or do you just shut down?
You may not. Probably have to end it. I don't see how they get back.
You could always rebrand, come out as a new product.
Is the brand really that damaged when you go to a point of saying, like, no, we just stood up against ransom malicious actors, that sort of thing? Like, we refused. We paid the punishment for that. We're dealing with the consequences of that. Does it offer more trust for the name or less?
Well, I think it's definitely going to be less, but the thing is do we as consumers really care as much anymore? I mean, T-Mobile was ransomware 3-4 times this year alone. People still use T-Mobile. Their stocks look great.
Who's T-Mobile? No, I'm kidding.
But I really think it just comes back to the whole cloud model, that the shared responsibility model is a broken model. They always say they're going to take care of the systems, but they always tell you that data is not guaranteed in the cloud model. You have to have your own backups. So if you didn't bring your data outside of the cloud, back it up somewhere, that's on the customer.
Would this have happened if you kept it in your own data center?
Oh, this could happen to anybody. On-prem, off-prem, it doesn't really matter where it's going to be. If you're going to be attacked by ransomware, you're going to be attacked by ransomware. I think it's just going to take another layer of precautions that we have to do as administrators and data custodians. Is we're going to have to take those data points and make sure that not only are they, on a different site and they're diverse enough that we're they're not connected to your network at all. Maybe you have it in the cloud and on-prem, right? You're going to have multiple locations, multiple layers.
I think the only difference is impact, right? So it's not just this company got ransomware. It's if you have it on-prem and you get ransomware, you're the only company impacted in that case instead of like a cloud hosting provider, right? Whereas someone like Cloud Nordic, that impacts a lot of companies. And I think this kind of transitions well into the next topic where we're talking a bit about liability, right? And in this case,
Mhm.
like when you've got a company, doing their best to do due diligence from a cybersecurity perspective, and it ends up impacting multiple other companies, who's responsible? What happens in those cases? And I know that a lot of what we're talking about also is going to shift kind of into software companies, but I think this is a great time to talk about it when it comes to hosting services as well.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely a lot to consider. We do have the shared responsibility. Going back to Microsoft, they make it very clear. Here's your piece. Here's our piece. AWS does the same. Google does the same, and we have to be very cognizant of that because I don't think many people are. I think people think I put it up there and it's good, or they have better security than I do. They're better at this than I am. They have better resources than I do, and to a degree, yes, they're going to do a better job than you can do in-house, but you have to remember you have a part in it. And if you forget that, you're going to fall into that spot where maybe you're using a Cloud Nordic and you're down. And potentially, if that's your whole business up there, you're in probably worse condition than they are.
I think that's why I keep saying we need to be diverse. There's so many more companies out there that are like, okay, I'm in the cloud, but do I just stay in AWS or do I now have GCP or Azure, the other products available at my fingertips? I really think cross-cloud platforms are going to be the way to make it all work. So
Right.
you were talking about the software being the liability on it, and so we're talking about the Move It lawsuit, right?
Yeah, so that's our last topic, at least for tech news, is the Move It lawsuit and pushing the liability onto the software creator or the software vendor and making sure that they take responsibility for their software. And I'm in the tech or the software industry, at least the organization I work for, and I manage a lot of the digital infrastructure and the security side of things. And this is not the first time I've heard of this conversation, but it's got some weight to it now, right? Because of who it affected. That's the unfortunate thing when it comes to security. Sometimes it depends on who gets hit, what company, what size. If it's just me and you, it's almost like, yeah, that's just another hack. But once we get to major corporations, guys like Delta, and some of these other big guys that were part of this, it's humongous. And who's at fault here? Is it, I know we, from a risk perspective, we're always supposed to take care of our third-party risk and check in on these guys and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing according to our contract. But if you're not double checking in on that, does that fall on you, even if they're doing it? Or if maybe they're doing everything part of their contract? We go back all the way to the Target hack and the PCI information that was leaked. Target was compliant. They did things according to compliance. So would that make them more liable? And that's the whole thing too. I think it comes down to the companies making sure who they're using, the vendors they're using, are doing their due diligence.
I think it comes back to negligence as well. Like it really is do you know about the exploit or not?
Yeah, and I think that's the tough spot, right? If the software vendor knows about it, or especially if they know about it and they're not fixing it, that's a big issue.
I mean, from what I saw, Move It was notified about the vulnerability, was it 3 months prior to everyone getting breached? So to me, that kind of puts the spotlight back on them. We have a bug bounty program. You were notified about the bug and you just sat on it.
Right. There's always some kind of risk mitigation you can do, right? Notify the customers, do some kind of risk mitigation. How do you protect yourself until maybe it was, a long bug fix that just took time to patch out, but there's something they could have done to help, right?
Yeah. You could have been like, hey, we can't patch this right away, but here are some compensating controls that you can put in place for this program. And I'm kind of on the other side of it. I think software vendors should be held liable, but at the same time, what does that do for software manufacturers as far as incentives? If we go around holding everybody responsible, what's their incentive to make it? Because now we're holding them accountable. It's only a matter of time before they're going to get burned by developing their own product.
Right. I really think there needs to be another, I hate government compliance, but I really think there needs to be another level of protection. As consumers, how are we going to know the compliance of every vendor out there? Do they have a score? Is there a rating that we can put on every one of these software vendors to say, hey, anytime they get a vulnerability, they patch it within the average of 28 days, something like that, and there has to be a group that's going to have to manage this, right? And so that way we can have some confidence. We do it with businesses. You have the Better Business Bureau, right?
Yeah,
Why can't we do that for your software vendors and patching and security?
I agree. But then who does that responsibility fall on? Our government? Because they're still trying to create a framework that's complete.
Well, and sometimes it becomes an even more major issue. And I think the Move It is a primary case for this, in the sense of, like, I know a lot of companies that weren't primarily using Move It. They were using a different software vendor who used Move It as one of their integrations on the back end to process something. And that's where most of the companies that were impacted weren't even Move It customers, right? And so who becomes liable for that? Is it the person, the company that was contracted that was using Move It products, or is it Move It specifically? It becomes a lot more complicated once you start thinking about integrations.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes down to some movement in the industry as well. I know I mentioned this when we were chatting earlier a little bit about today's topics. SBOMs, software bullet sales, and knowing not only what the software is composed of, but maybe the pieces it relies upon that you don't see, so that you can get this list and like, oh, it relies on this, it relies on Log4j, it relies on all these other pieces, so you have a better idea as someone who's trying to manage your third-party risk to say, hey, is this anything I need to worry about? And pull up this list and say, oh, there it is. I do have to worry about this. I know from my experience working with the banking industry, they're very good at this, as they should be. I remember getting emails like, hey, we just heard about this vulnerability. Does your software that we purchased from you use these libraries? And we can say, yeah, no, yes, no, maybe we do, and we've patched it. And it's a lot of things that they're doing a very good job at managing, as they should, but they also have regulations on top of them that kind of lead into that. So do we need, as John was kind of hinting at, do we need some kind of regulation that says everyone needs to do this bare minimum?
I think that's exactly it. Like, we're currently in what we would consider the wild west boom of software. And right now there's so many software companies starting up and succeeding. And what are the largest companies in the world right now? They're mostly software and tech companies, right? Microsoft, Apple, Google. And why are they so quick and lucrative? And some of the things that we talk about are like, what is the average life cycle of a software company, right? And I've actually kind of been paying attention. It's somewhere around 10 to 15 years for most of them before they get acquired, or before they shut down, or before they're pushed out of the market, or whatever it is, right? The software company life cycle is so accelerated in comparison to the average company. And really it comes down to, it moves so quickly because it's not regulated, right? And so a lot of folks will tell you, like, well, regulation is going to stifle innovation. It's like, okay, sure, but also innovation has advanced so far that it no longer protects the consumer. And we need to kind of find that balance of protecting the individuals and passing laws that can do that. And I do think the EU is much further ahead than us on that.
Definitely agree on that. I think, as you mentioned as well, like that life cycle being purchased, I think that's part of the problem as well. Is sometimes these are kind of almost turn into get rich quick schemes where it's like, hey, my software is blown up this far. I want to get to point B. I want to get to Series B, Series C, Series D, and then I want to go public. Security is going to slow that down. It's just fact. So do I worry about security, or do I keep putting these features that our customers are asking for that are going to take us to that next level and then going to get us those investors? So part of it does need to come from your investors as well. Your investors have to say, hey, we want to make sure this is secure, because the last thing we want is a move it situation while you're trying to get seed money, round A, B, or C money, and then it's all tanked.
This kind of leads into a lesson that one of my mentors taught me, which is called, what are the incentives? If you ever think about why somebody does something, or why a company does something, why a person acts a certain way, always take a moment to think about what their incentives are, right? And when you're thinking about a startup company, what are their incentives, especially if they have investors? Their incentives are rapid growth, period, end of story. And that's all they care about. And so you're going to find most of those companies don't do their security due diligence until they're already established. And sometimes that, even then, it's too late, it's too risky. They want to be rapid. Like, a lot of smaller software companies will go with the rapid growth so they can be acquired, so that someone like an Amazon or a Google will purchase or gobble them up. And then it's that company's problem to deal with. And hopefully they've got processes in place. And a lot of the times they do. But it is one of those where, you see a lot of that due diligence completely skipped over for the sake of capitalism.
Yeah, capitalism, and then by the time they do make it, now they've got a third floor of lawyers, and they don't really care because they'll just put you in court forever. There's two sides of that story, right? And it's sad to say that sometimes risk mitigation and risk acceptance is, I just have a lot of money.
I think we're at the risk of a societal, like technological oligarchy, where software companies grow so fast and so quickly and make so much money that those folks with that money are now the ones kind of controlling government by using like lobbyists and taking advantage of the legal system to freeze up competitors or to freeze up people that like try to protest what's going on. It becomes a legal nightmare, and even that can be lucrative sometimes, right? And I think that we're definitely seeing kind of a lot of those ripple effects within the United States at a minimum, but likely globally. Shannon, are you still napping over there?
You know, something about your voices is just soothing.
It's a good thing. Our listeners have something to listen to on their rides to work.
Guys, let's
Laying
do
down next to the bed.
ASMR. Let's do some ASMR. Everybody click your tongues.
Lay your head on your
Crazy.
pillow and take a nap.
So kind of going back to the topic of liability, one of the things that I wanted to kind of draw a comparison to with you all while we were talking about it was autonomous vehicles. I don't know how much you all pay attention to that, but there was one like major hurdle a few years ago that was kind of crossed from a legal perspective that was actively preventing autonomous vehicles from even like hitting the streets to test, which was if there is an accident, who's liable? The driver or the company that created the car, because the driver's not actually controlling the vehicle. And it took quite a while. I think it was Google actually that was pressing for this to turn it into the company being liable. And that I thought was very strange. Like a lot of folks were saying like companies are never going to voluntarily accept liability for something like this. But Google kind of leading the charge on that put them in a situation where now they can control the innovation and now they can control the design of the vehicle as a result. Because I think we found with autonomous vehicles, like they're actually safer if they don't have steering wheels where somebody can try to like throw their own judgment, like let the software do what it's supposed to do. And I think we've all heard that like, you know, trolley car situation of if an autonomous vehicle is driving in the road and there's somebody in the crosswalk and then it has no choice but to veer, but then there's somebody on the sidewalk, how does it choose which one to hit? It's a trolley car, you know, situation. I don't know that there is a right answer there, but ultimately like that conversation of liability, it very much reminds me of what companies are going to step forward and try to volunteer it for the greater good, for the betterment of the development of the system.
Right. And there's not a system out there that's going to be perfect either, right? And as soon as you take humans out of it and you're like, oh, the system has to do it. Oh, I want 100% success rate. Is that really going to be achievable? I mean, there's always accidents, right?
Well, and in the world of software, bugs.
Yep.
And another, just throw the company out there is, you know, Tesla is the one who keeps coming up in the news because of their autopilot, right? When they first came out with autopilot, they kept talking about it being an autonomous driving. And there were people that were sleeping. There were people that were going down the road like it was an autopilot car. And how many accidents have we seen with that technology?
It's been a lot. And actually, I think Elon Musk even came out and did an interview about, you know, and addressed the person sleeping behind the wheel and said that they had to like actually install like alarm clocks into the cars and then set it so that like if you don't touch the steering wheel after a set amount of time, it starts to slow the car down and pull itself over, you know, stuff like that. They had to put in security measures because of that.
It's funny because I think that also triggered other car companies that don't have autonomous driving to also do something similar. Because I remember noticing that on my wife's car. And I was holding the steering wheel just kind of lightly. And it noticed that I wasn't holding it at least tight enough. I don't know if that's sensors watching us hit bumps and it would just shake. And it's like, there should have been something holding the steering wheel here. Or if there actually is some kind of sensor in the wheel. But it had a little boop, like, put your hands back on the wheel. It thought I'd completely disconnected. I was like, that's interesting and nice.
Yeah, and I've noticed that too. Like anything with lane assist, like our car does the same thing. Is if you don't keep your hands on the steering wheel, lane assist then starts freaking out. And most of the time I turn it off because I'm sorry, I don't drive with a 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. That's not how I drive down the road. And if you don't do that, the car freaks out. Like, no, you need to put your hands back on the wheel. And if you try to drive with one hand down at the bottom or something like that, sometimes it goes, no, you need to be holding onto the steering wheel.
Yeah, it gets quite salty at you if you try and do that.
Yeah, so I was looking at some of the stats even just with autopilot. I mean, autopilot is already at fault for over 18 deaths and over 3,000 accidents, and it's still a pretty new technology. So do you think we're going to find acceptance in this, or do you think, like, how are we going to get to the next tier of automation?
I think we'd almost have to get to a point where it's safer, I guess, almost per capita to have automated driving.
Mm-hmm.
For the amount of roads, yeah, and I think it has to come down to statistics there. I think once we get to that point, it'll be more acceptable, right? It's safest way to travel is flying, and then it's an autonomous car, then it's someone behind the wheel. I mean, I love the idea, and I think there's definitely great value in it. The question becomes, yeah, if there is something that goes wrong, are we going to have forensics experts now downloading car data and saying, was it a bug? Was it this? Because if it's a bug, it's the company. If it's not, then it's the user, and it's a bold move, like Kenny said, for Google to do that, to say, you know what, we'll take responsibility here. And obviously there's that other agenda of, like, because we want to make sure that we can also innovate the way we feel will be the right way to do that.
Well, Josh, I'm going to argue one point you made too, where you said it comes down to, like, is whenever it's safer, whenever we start to cross that line. That's not going to happen. And what we've seen when it comes to autonomous vehicles is the things that make them less safe is not the vehicle themselves, it's humanity. It's the other people around it that are not predictable because they're not a part of the system. And we've seen tests in fully smart cities that are like samples where they go and build a town that has no humans in it, and they put these autonomous systems in them, and they work flawlessly. They don't even need streetlights. They literally just communicate to each other and constantly move. It is safer to not have a human. That's the point. And as long as these cars are sharing the road with humans, there will always be more safety flaws. But I'm going to go back to that question of what are the incentives? Safety is not an incentive. Money is an incentive. It's not going to cross that line of adoption until it becomes lucrative to do so, until companies are incentivized to do so, whether that be a government benefit that's funding some of that, or there's a business model that's invented that helps support that. Consider, like, free to use, software applications on the internet, like search engines, etc. Those that use advertisements to pay for their business model so they can offer free products, or, data mining, etc. That's a new business model. Well, not new anymore, but it was a new business model 20 years ago that was invented. Something like that kind of change or innovation would need to happen in order to get this adoption, more. But I also think that we're kind of starting in a bit of a backward state. We're focusing so much on the individual consumers because that's an untapped market that has a lot of potential growth. But what they should be focusing on is things like public transportation, like light rails, trains. Start turning those into autonomous vehicles, because A, it's easier to do, but B, the number of passengers is much higher, and C, you could focus on amenities when you don't have to pay for an engine.
Well, I think they're really trying to, like, they're trying to adapt an old system with something new, right? I don't think that's going to be the right answer. It's going to be, you need to build the infrastructure around the automation.
That's
if
true.
the infrastructure is not built around it, then it's doomed. It's set up to fail.
But then going back to that incentive conversation, right? Like, America as a country is so focused on owning their cars, and it's a cultural thing for us. Go to anywhere in Texas and tell someone not to own a vehicle, and tell me if you're going to make it out alive, right? Like, it's just not a thing in that state. There are some metropolitan areas where you don't have to own a vehicle. I'm one of those people that doesn't own a vehicle. But it is one of those concepts where culturally it will be challenging, and then you're going to end up with those legal battles from those companies that are disincentivized from that adoption, such as car dealers. Like, I think we're going to move to a point where autonomous vehicles are going to become less about ownership and more about services, right? Like, you're not going to own a car, you're going to hail a car. And that car is going to take you to work, and there's going to be nobody in it. And there might be 3 or 4 of you in it. There might be 20 of you in it. There might just be you by yourself. Who knows?
It's our new Uber.
Exactly. It's going to start replacing, gig work and stuff like that. And that's where those companies that will be shut down and replaced by that are going to slog it down in legal battles, right? And we've already seen that with Tesla trying to, like, sell directly to consumers in states where that's not even legal in several states now, because the car dealers lobbied against it and got laws passed. So you're going to see similar challenges, and it's going to really slow down the process. And we've seen that with autonomous vehicles. I think we're going to see it with other automation as well.
Right. And then coming back to the liability card, because that's really what we're talking about, is, like, who's going to be liable, right? And currently we've already seen that companies can already be liable for, for existing laws for negligence, breach of contracts, So many different things, right? And to be honest, you really almost don't have a reason to sue another company. Sometimes it's just for competitive advantage, and you'll see that a lot. So as we go down this road, though, is there going to be limited liability? Are we going to start seeing that starting to show up more? Not just from the consumer side of things, but anytime that we deal with other people's technology. You were talking about like a shared infrastructure system where, yeah, we don't own the cars anymore, but who owns the infrastructure? Does a city own the infrastructure and the cars are now owned by Tesla? That Tesla car picked me up. Like who's going to own that? And what if Tesla's car did damage to the city's infrastructure? Is now Tesla liable for that damage? Or is it the person who called the ride? It's almost like we're turning this into a service industry. Like we as consumers are really not going to be thinking about this. We really don't care. I called the Uber, I paid my $23 and I'm good to go. But what if it killed me on the way? Does my family now have the right to sue?
I think that's a totally fair question. And I think what we're seeing is society as a whole move away from ownership, right? We're seeing this even with the housing market right now, where it's almost impossible to buy homes in some places. And now you like most everyone are renters at this point. And you've got situations where you've got these massive investment companies going in and gobbling up all the residencies, right? And then only offering them for rent and not selling them, right? This isn't just hitting vehicles. This is hitting everything that is how we live. I do think that, I know you meant this as rhetorical question of what about the infrastructure, but I know that in Colorado, this is a very common thing where the roads are no longer owned by the government. There are still some roads that are, but you'll start to see segments. And anywhere that you see basically a toll road or a toll lane, that is now owned by a private company, and they have a contract with the government to maintain it. And the toll itself is how they make their money off of that, right? I think you're going to start to see more and more things like that become privatized and become less public services. And I don't know if that's wise or not. I think it can be just fine if well regulated. If not well regulated, it's going to become anti-consumer very quickly.
Yeah. And how do you continue? I'm sorry to say, but capitalism and competition is what keeps prices down. If it starts to become monopolies, there's one company that owns all the roads. How do we fight that?
I mean, we see that with internet companies, right? Like internet service providers, where a lot of the time, like they're not classified as a monopoly because across the country, there's a lot of them. But in every region, there's only one or two at best. Like you don't really have much choice in that matter, do you? Right? Like what's the difference?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more and more of that actually turning around. Now that big telecom is a thing of the past. But you're right. I think you're still going to see it in other aspects of life, right?
Yeah, I get concerned about like the topics of infrastructure, especially when we start going over to like utility companies. If we go over into like the power companies as well, right? You have to plug into the grid that you're geographically located next to. You don't get a choice as a consumer. However, because it's classified as a utility and managed essentially by the FCC, like it's at least not predatory. Although there are some cities that I've personally witnessed where your electric bills are through the roof just because you live in a city that has lower income. It's very weird.
There's two sides of that story. I mean, if you live in Texas, that's not the case. You get to choose your power company, even though it's the same lines. Like there are dozens, but we've all seen how that works for them sometimes when they run out of power or when the grid itself has issues, right? They've cut themselves off from the other states. So
you
I
choose
don't know,
the company, but you don't get to make it through winter. Sorry,
right.
Ted Cruz.
Sorry, Austin.
Just gotta sign up for the winter package, okay? Stay warm.
Right.
I have gone on a bit of a tangent. I apologize. I don't mean to leave you guys out. I tend to just kind of go off.
No, that was some really good discussion about it, because really when we come back to it, a lot of these companies are software companies. How do you make an autonomous vehicle? The software is what makes it autonomous. The hardware is still the same hardware that's been there for years. So who's going to be liable? And even if we look at this from a different perspective, we like to talk about autonomous vehicles because it's the big rage in the news right now. And how do you do that life or death thing? I mean, I love to quote those lines from like iRobot. Do I save the little girl or me? And the robot, crunched the numbers and saved me. And of course now I'm dealing with other issues. I thought that was a really good point of the movie, was to kind of show like, is this the way we're going? Right? Are we now just going to become a number?
Yeah, you took the thought right out of my head, and that movie was perfect for that situation because we're going to run into that. We're going to run into the percentages. It's like, okay, who has a better chance of living here? As an adult, we're going to be like, save the kid. save the kid, especially as a parent. We're going to say save the damn kid, and that'll haunt us. That would definitely haunt us, even though we had no control over the situation.
Well, and this is where I would throw in the ethical conundrum of, do you save the kid because of the potential, or do you save the person who's providing to society right now? That comes down to, like, do you save the mother or the child during childbirth? Like, those are all the, like, moral questions that I don't think a human should have to answer. Like, that's a level of responsibility that nobody should volunteer for. And at some point, those decisions are going to have to be made by someone. I hope I'm never that person.
Well, there's been a growing call for, developer and software companies to, be held responsible for these vulnerabilities, right? For these things in their product. And I think, Shannon, you were talking to us earlier this week of just banging your head against the wall of, like, because vendors were coming in and patching things, changing things, and causing issues. And you work in the healthcare industry. So how do you feel about software vendors coming in and not patching something, or just willy-nilly taking away a feature that could probably take someone's life?
It's frustrating because a lot of the time I have no insight into that. They just come in and say, hey, we're doing this and you're going to let us. There's vulnerabilities out there now that can allow a threat actor to modify a CT scan, put cancer where there is no cancer, take cancer away on a subject where there is no cancer. And it can truly play with life and death situations. So looking at it in the context that way, I would have to say that it should go back to the software developer. They should be keeping up with that, but healthcare is not highly funded.
Right. So who's left with the consequences, right?
Right.
Like,
is it the individual hospital that decides to use the product? Is it the product manufacturer? Is it the software developer that runs on the manufacturing equipment? Pick which stage. Who needs to be held reliable, or do all three need to be held reliable at the same time?
Yeah, so maybe there needs to be some kind of threshold, right? If when it comes to PCI, there's certain pieces that they expect you to fix. If you have a vulnerability that's critical or high, there's an expectation that it's going to be fixed, and then you're going to provide the remediation scan that says, hey, I fixed this. That needs to be in a timely manner. So maybe there needs to be something similar to that. Software, I don't know who would do this because we don't have a Visa of software or a MasterCard of software to create this group, but there needs to be some sort of almost, I guess, mutual agreement in a way, without going the regulation route, because that'll take years. There needs to be some way almost of, I guess, developer integrity to say, hey, if we run into something that's this bad where it could affect someone's life, it needs to be fixed within X amount of time. Otherwise, and I guess this is where we would need regulation and laws, is then it becomes fully liable on the software company. Like, you've known about this for X amount of time. Once you pass this point, it's all on you.
Right. Capitol Hill's always been trying to do this, right? Capitol Hill's been trying to come up with a national cybersecurity strategy. We know this, right? But again, it comes back to, okay, even if we open the door here and let's say let's find a way to incentivize the companies and the industry to come together, and let's come up with this regulation and say, okay, if you're a company that actually are meeting the security standards and we can prove it, how do we incentivize them? Are we going to give them safe harbor? Are they now not able to be sued for it because they did due diligence? Or is it going to be harder for us to figure out, well, what is due diligence, right? Who's going to actually make that decision? And so for us as security experts, like, how are we going to then help Capitol Hill, and these policymakers tell us, how do we build a narrative around it? How do we show them what is expected and what is not expected? I know some of you guys are really into security, more so than I am, and I don't know how many of you have been following the security frameworks, but Security Framework 2.0, is now starting to be ratified, right? We're starting to get that far with it. And I kind of looked at it, and to be honest, it's still very vague. Like, is there really any clear direction and clear legal language that needs to be captured, to help us navigate the challenging environment of this liability? I mean, who are we to come up with this together? Or like, who's going to stand up and be like, all right, this is the level of security that we expect from everyone?
Yeah, and it is pretty vague, but I think a lot of that was in an effort to try to encompass a broader audience for it. I think the initial grab for the framework was definitely critical infrastructure, and now it's here. How do we broaden this out? And they did add the pillar of governance, which was sprinkled throughout before, but they kind of gave it more importance. And That's huge, because a lot of people, and unfortunately we see this a lot in security, is they have this checklist mentality. It's like, oh, do we have this? Yes, I have that. I have my antivirus. I have my firewall. I have this rule set up. And it's a mentality that unfortunately screws us over. I go back to when I mentioned the Target hack earlier. They checked all their PCI checkboxes. They're good, but are they? It's a tough spot. I think you almost, and unfortunately has to be industry specific, because different industries have different concerns, different risks.
Right. I worked for that payment processor. That was hell back then. It's 2012 timeframe when the Target hack happened, and it was crazy to see how, something as simple as an HVAC system, it could let in a vulnerability that large, and almost negligence of whoever set up the network. Like, who checked them off for security compliance, right? Were the POS machines, the registers themselves, supposed to be on the separate VLAN, a separate network, and islanded off? Well, I don't know. Back then, I don't think it was actually part of PCI compliance, right? Having that one unsecure device is what really dealt them in.
And it's still like that today, unfortunately. They come in, you voluntarily get a third-party audit. They come in and they say, do you have a firewall? Yes, here it is. And they say, good enough. I mean, at what point in the framework do they need to start being due diligent and say, okay, you showed me your firewall, show me that you have it properly configured and that it's actually working to the capacity that it should be?
What are you saying? Allow any is not a great rule? I mean,
It's
come on,
not
guys.
not a very good one. Maybe for troubleshooting.
Okay, good.
Fun firewall story. I had to go back and remember how to do IP tables recently and forgot that they were sequential rules. I hate it.
Oh, do you know what I hate about IP tables in Linux? It doesn't exist anymore. They changed it. It's called Firewall D now.
Yep.
It's awesome. I don't know about you guys, but every time you put up a new technology, I feel like the old fart now, because I'll type a command. I'm like, oh crap, that worked in 4. Nope, that one worked in 6. That one worked in 8. Well, now 9. What the hell do they want me to type? Like, it's different. I kind of feel for everybody else when that newbie comes in and like, what are you doing? Just go to Network Manager, and I'm like, dude, that wasn't a thing back in the day. I'm sorry.
While we're on the topic of security and kind of the impacts, I think it's a good time to start shifting towards the ways that these types of things impact us, which is usually it impacts our stress levels, it impacts our mental health, it impacts the way that we live our lives, right? I think any of you that are watching this in video format, you can see that most of us are either in pajamas or workout clothes right now. And that's part of the stress management plan, right? We will go through quite a bit through some of these. So what are some of your guys' methods for kind of bringing the stress levels down from these types of topics while we're in the workforce going through these things? And sometimes we get hit with an incident, or we get through, a management issue, or whatever it may be. Like IT in and of itself, working in technology, just for being fast paced, it's hard to keep up, and human brains are not meant for it. We're routine, habitual creatures by default, and technology moves too fast for us to be able to form habits well, right? So how do you guys all kind of deal with that? Why don't we start with Shannon?
He takes naps.
Naps are good. I picked up a new hobby. I play golf. I try and get out with friends. John and I just went and saw Ed Sheeran. That was a great time. Kenny met us. Unfortunately, got another friend of ours all riled up, and she wouldn't be quiet for the rest of the night.
It was great times, guys. It was great.
I'm the best.
No, I think you're really right on that. Is like finding those hobbies, right? It's like, how do you get out of it? How do you turn off your brain? I'm sorry to say, but I think for all the hours that you have to have the brain on and you think about it, I look for, how do I turn it off? Do I go home and cook meals? I actually just cooked 4 meals. I did some meal prepping. Why? Well, meal prepping is nice and I don't have to think about dinner. But to be honest, it's like a way for me to check out. Like, I can cook and not have to think.
I'm going to second that. I think cooking is my therapy. Well, until I slice my, fingertip off, that's a whole other story. That was a few months ago. But no, I think one of the things that I was just talking about earlier today was some of my other hobbies. Like I think from the last cast, you guys all knew that I'm a huge fan of Baldur's Gate 3. I'm a fairly big avid gamer, a big fan of Zelda, stuff like that. But what I find too is that the more time I spend on video games, the less they help me with my stress. And I have changed the types of games that I play over time. I used to be a god at Unreal Tournament 2003 back in college, but I can't touch a shooter with a 10-foot pole anymore because it gets my blood boiling too much. It gets my blood pressure too high. And now I'm at the point where I kind of like the slow-paced, turn-based stuff, but even then, anything that's got me looking at a screen or anything that has me around technology, for some reason, it keeps my stress where it is. It doesn't bring it up anymore, but it certainly doesn't bring it down. And that's why you see me in workout clothes today. Like sometimes you just need a little physical activity to change that up, to change your brain chemistry. What about you, Josh?
I'm going to second the physical thing. I know for me, I hold a lot of my stress in my shoulders and my back. And that's actually one of the reasons I mentioned before I started doing like pull-ups. I wanted to like strengthen that area because I do have a tendency to sit terribly at my desk. I should really start looking at, ergonomic chairs and really getting my back set up and sitting properly. But, there's still the young version of me that's like, yeah, I can sit like this. And they're like, yeah, I can get work done. But no, and a lot of it is, I think for me, it's always been physical, like just getting out there and doing something physical and just letting like my body do its thing. Cause that's really letting my brain relax and like putting my body to work. I used to go for runs, but I don't really have time for that anymore. I wish I did. I always joke that I want a treadmill, and I don't know where I'd put it, or if I'd be one of those guys that bought it, used it for a month and then just let it collect dust. So it's hard, especially finding time. Managing a family can be tough. I know you guys know, but the listeners don't necessarily know, but I have 4 kids. So there's such a balance to go there. And I know my back and my shoulders are really when I know it. When I'll sit down or I'll be walking around, I'm like, man, my shoulders are killing me today. And then my wife will be like, hey, you want me to rub it a little bit? I'm like, sure. And then I'm just like, oh my God. Like I just, this relief comes over to me. And like, it's one of those things that you don't realize how good it feels until you're like, that's where I've been holding all that. So like I said, physical and
That's how the 4 kids
keep my
happened.
shoulders and body. What's that?
That's how the 4 kids happened.
Didn't you have 5 kids last week? What happened?
Kenny fell down a well.
The other thing I want to add to, I'm a strong advocate for mental health, and I am personally a big fan of talking therapy and cognitive training. I've been doing it for over 10 years now. I think it's incredibly healthy for people. I think it's very good. And I personally believe that everyone should spend some time on it, although frequency is definitely something that like needs to vary based on the individual. Even if you're feeling good, like I think of it as like a maintenance or like a wellness check, like when you go to the doctor for your annual checkup. You should do something like that every so often. But one of the things that's come out of it for me has been meditation or really it's called mindfulness these days. But I like to do guided meditations, and no, this isn't sponsored, but I'm a fan of like Calm and Headspace as, like 10-minute guided things that I can just do in the middle of the day. Like if I go through a stressful meeting and I've got like 15 minutes, I might like run to the bathroom and pretend to poop, and I'll just do a little guided meditation away from everybody and just, air out the butthole a little bit. But I'm a strong advocate of doing some mindfulness, practicing and separating yourself from your thoughts, I think is really the big thing, and trying not to get hung up into the situations. I think a lot of us spend a lot of time burying our face in code or digging into problem solving. And when we start to think about our own stress and we start to think about our own mental well-being, we dig into that like a problem to solve, when actually that just makes it worse. What you need to do is get away from it and separate yourself from it and do something else and take care of yourself, right? So I really just want to spend a little time talking about that today.
Yeah, what's funny about that too is like earlier today I was reading an article on LinkedIn. I like to scroll LinkedIn. I don't do other social media. And one of it was talking about was visualizing the daily routines of the smartest people of the world. And the daily routine was very interesting to look at. Their day job and their actual creative time was actually very small compared to what they did the rest of the day. And I think there's something to that, right? Like how, as I think even for the smartest of the people, they did not spend, 16 hours a day on a single task. They spent, I think the most I saw on there was like 4 or 5 hours a day is all they did. The rest of it was leisure, exercise, food. It was all done. Sleep was a very important part for a lot of them. And I think that's very important for all of us to think about.
Speaking of Headspace, I actually read the book that the creator created, Meditation and Mindfulness, I think it was called. Because I was at a point as well where I was like, I need to like find better ways to handle the stress. I wouldn't trade my 4 kids for anything in the world, but sometimes there's days where it's just like, I need a moment, and I needed to find ways like, how can I zone out or zone in quicker? And that was kind of one of those books that kind of talks over that. And kind of speaks of that and leads to the path of the guy creating Headspace. And it was pretty insightful read to kind of let you realize how your mind tries to work and how you could get creative. And exercise and all these meditation, all these things can allow you to really fine tune your body and your mind to knock out probably 8 hours of work in 4 to 5 hours, because you're not, fogged over like everyone else is during their day, because they're constantly doing everything else. Getting all that stuff figured out, getting into a proper routine can definitely help.
Yeah, I want to actually say thank you, Kenny, for bringing this one up, because it's really hard for a lot of us to talk about it. Like, mental health is one of those things that none of us really want to put on the plate, but it's such an important piece of everything we do.
Noticed it tends to be a reoccurring trend in a lot of people in this field. And I don't know if it's just by coincidence or if it is a legitimate thing inside of IT where it just beats you to the point to where you have to deal with these issues because the career field dictates it.
I think you're onto some. Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, I think we're really in a thankless job in a lot of ways. And I think that has something to do with it, because no one really pats us on the back or says, hey, great job, the network's still running. Everything is working great. But as soon as something breaks, they're on our backs like it should have been fixed 3 days ago. So I think that has a lot to do with it, is like, we don't necessarily get the appreciation for when things go right, but we definitely get the blame when things go wrong.
I think there's a little bit more to it than that as well. Like, Shannon, I think you're onto something. It is the career field, but it's also not necessarily always people's reactions to it. I do think that contributes to it, but I think some of it is just the nature of the field as well, right? We've talked so many times about the swiftness and how rapid the field changes. Most people, like, I'm going to use my grandpa as an example. My grandpa was a plumber, and once he learned those skills, he was able to fine tune those skills over 60 years, and ultimately, like, was just a masterful plumber, but didn't have to reinvent those skills every 6 to 12 months, right? We have to constantly learn. We have to constantly change and reinvent ourselves and redevelop those skills. And quite frankly, our skills are typically obsolete around the same time that we learn them. And I describe this to my students of, there's a life cycle around new technology. It's new technology comes out, we learn new technology, we implement it, we optimize it, we learn new technology. And the overall, that time span is about 1 to 3 years, depending on your industry. I was like, and if you ever get hung up on a single thing that you've developed, you're now the detriment to that by sticking to something for too long, right? You're now bringing the company down with you, right? So I think a lot of it comes down to just that constant having to relearn and redevelop yourself, which really adds to the fatigue of it, because you can't just get into this routine of go in, do your part, and go home. This has to kind of become your life. We have to constantly be reading about what's going on outside of work. We have to be learning and getting certifications and getting education. And all of those are things that we have to do outside of our normal business hours, right? This place, like this industry, is designed to create burnout. That's why people do those quick rich schemes. That's why they make a software company and they sell it, because they're burned out.
But they're burnt out on an island. Good for them.
But they got a yacht, so hey.
Oh man, I don't want to have us go too much deeper. I think we could go on forever. So let's get this. I want to get this moving along. I know I'm getting tired. Like you guys said, we're in PJs. Usually I'm in PJs all day unless I have a video call meeting, which I'm sure my boss will eventually be like, hey, I saw your podcast. You should really get dressed.
He's in his PJs too. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. But I do want to add our little tech recommendation for today. I really wanted to give a shout out to the guys at Riverside. Riverside is the application we're using to kind of record this. What many people don't know is even as techies, we run into tech problems all the time, especially when it comes to something new that we're trying out. And as we tried to record this multiple times before finally getting some success, it really came down to finding an application that really streamlines this process for us. And that was Riverside, riverside.fm. I'll put in a link down below. It is an affiliate link, so it will help us out to keep this thing going. It's a great platform. If you're looking for something simple, really just take the troubleshooting out of the entire equation. It records videos local on your machine, uploads them so you get the highest quality possible. There's no worrying about someone's internet connection or someone being on Wi-Fi. You're really going to clean up a lot of the things that you might run into trying to record something for a podcast or an interview or anything like that. It's something that I'm going to be recommending to my company if the situation ever comes up, and I definitely recommend to you guys if you want to do it. Again, link is down below. You guys have anything else to close this one out?
Take naps. Naps are good.
Yes.
Naps are good. Workout is good.
Take naps. If you have little ones, cuddle them while you're doing it.
If they would cuddle with you.
All right, well, I guess that wraps up another episode, guys. Thanks for joining me tonight. Let's keep this going. I'm excited to keep going. Can't wait to have some guests on here. We'll get there, though. But yeah, thanks for listening. Thank you. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Have a good night, guys.
Thanks, guys.